Welcome to UNAM Chicago's CAFÉ EXPRESSO, a space for bilateral conversations with people from all walks of life. Tune in to Spanish Public Radio and follow us on social media. And now your host, Alberto Foncerrada.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another edition of CAFÉ EXPRESSO. My name is Alberto Foncerrada, and I am your host. CAFÉ EXPRESSO is a program of UNAM Chicago in alliance with Spanish Public Media. Today is a special day. I have a guest, Analú López. How are you, Analú?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. How are you?
Good, thank you. Let me tell you a little bit about Analú López. We have done extensive work with her. She's a librarian, a photographer. She was born and raised on the southwest side of Chicago in the neighborhood of La Villita. And she currently works for the Newberry Library, where we have done projects together. Welcome again, Analú, and why don't you walk us a little bit through your story, because we know you, because we have done extensive work with you and your organization, but we want to know also a little bit about your background. Why don't you walk us a little bit about your upbringing and how did you become what you are now?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Again, thank you for having me. I am born and raised here in Chicago. I grew up in La Villita. I still live there. I actually decided to stay in the neighborhood, and my family moved there like in the 70s, but they've been here in Chicago since the 50s. So I wanted to stay in the neighborhood because I have a lot of community work that I do there too. I have a lot of roots there. So, for those that are listening that aren't familiar with La Villita, it's a very Mexican, Central American neighborhood. So I feel at home when I'm there. I have a lot of friends and family there. So I love my neighborhood. So I still live in the same house I grew up in with my grandparents. I come from a long line of women that just love libraries and museums. A couple women in my family were photographers as well. So I think that's kind of like how I also became a photographer. I also have women in my family that were writers, that were like historians, but like not academic historians, but like family historians. So I was always interested in museums, libraries, stuff like that. And I think that kind of translated later when I went back to school and I wanted to pursue a master's in library science. And I first found out about the Newberry here when I was in an undergrad at Harold Washington Library. So an instructor there told us, hey, there's this like library that has like all these old books. And I was like, oh, you mean the Harold Washington Library? And he's like, no, there's another book that you can actually see that has like the Popol Vuh. And I heard about the Popol Vuh and a group of us came. So I was about 20 at this time. That was like 20 years ago. I came with a group of friends to come see it, and ever since then, I was just hooked on the Newberry. So I wanted to get a job here. I didn't know how I would get a job here, but I knew I wanted to work at the library. So I decided to go back to school for specifically to be a librarian, but to focus in like reference services, archives, and access to what they call like cultural heritage materials. So yeah, that's in a nutshell my background.
Okay, yes. And well, I know that also part of your interest is in underrepresented indigenous narratives. And I would invite people actually to look at your blog because it's fascinating and you have done extensive work on that. And I love your writings.
Oh, thank you.
How is this? How did you become so interested in this on the background, on the roots, and on these indigenous narratives?
Yeah, so it really comes from my family. So I grew up very close to my grandmother. She lived with us. We took care of her. She passed away in 1997. So I was around 15 at the time. But I always remember her instilling in us to love where we come from, love for the land, love for our people, love for education. She loved education too. Through family research, I found out that after she passed, my family tried to get a scholarship for high school students to go to college, and I didn't know that they had done that, but that's a side note. But it really was instilled by her and my family just to be proud of where we come from. And she always would tell me stories of back in her town where she was from, and she would always say, you know, that they we're from San Luis Potosi, our family, and through stories from families and also research and her, they would say, you know, we're Mexican, but we also are indigenous as well. We have other languages that were spoken. And in my, like when I was younger, I didn't really think about it much. But then as I got older, when I got started attending school too, I started trying to pursue a little bit more about our family history. And it turned out that, yeah, like everything she would tell me when I was a teenager was true. And not that I didn't believe it wasn't, but I was just like, oh, this is, why wasn't this like passed down through the generations? We came here as immigrants, and then we kind of started assimilating, right? And just speaking Spanish. So I got really interested in these ideas of how through migration things change, right? Sometimes for survival, sometimes for certain reasons. So fast forward into really that undergrad class I took in Harold Washington, I started being really interested in history too, and like history, and then specifically Latin American history. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the main reasons.
Yeah, there's there's a particular piece that caught my attention when I was going through your blog. This one on land acknowledgements. Yes. I was in Canada before. Well, I moved to Chicago in 2006, but I interrupted my stay here because I went to Canada for work, and I was there for 5.5 years, and I was amazed on how much land acknowledgements, how important it is in Canada, and you know, all these ceremonies, and every official act begins with an acknowledgement of the indigenous land and all that. And you wrote a beautiful piece on it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what it entails, and if we can go a little bit on Chicago, I mean, the roots of Chicago, and what can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I'm glad someone reads my blog. I sometimes I just write these pieces because I have these conversations with like friends and family, and people are always asking me for resources. So I was like, let me start doing these like blogs with resources if people want to get like a 101 on a certain topic, right? Like what is the land acknowledgement, right? So so as you might have seen in my website, I mentioned how land acknowledgements are something that are done, right, to recognize a place as an indigenous place that has always, as I always like to say when I do presentations, I'm like, you know, this is and will always continue to be indigenous land, right? So it's a way to acknowledge the historical presence of indigenous people, but also the current and present and future generations of indigenous people here, right? So as you said, you know, it's popular in Canada. Canada is doing some fantastic stuff in terms of like indigenous studies, indigenous librarianship, land acknowledgement. So they're way ahead of the States here. You know, especially here at the library, we worked on a land acknowledgement that we updated. I think it was in 2018 or 2019 that we updated it, to also acknowledge, like, as a colonial institution, as the Newberry, that we also occupy certain areas here in Chicago and this area that was once where Native people were, right? And Native people continue to be here. So I think it's really important to not only acknowledge that, but also work and implement ways where we can be better relatives or collaborators with Native people that are here in Chicago, and also people that are in Native people that are in other areas that were displaced or removed forcibly from Chicago. So as we know, like Illinois and Chicago has a lot of you know, usually you say the Council of Three Fires, right? So the Potawatomi, Odawa, and Ojibwe. But then there were many other Native nations that called Chicago home, right? So we had the Kickapoo. We had an interesting history too. Fact on that is the Kickapoo, and they were removed here from Chicago, we also have Kickapoo that are in Mexico, right? So around the border, there's a Kickapoo community. Other ones like Miami, I'm trying to think of all of them because there's Chicago was such a, and continues to be such a hub where people came to meet, right? Because of the river and the waterways that we have here. So, yeah.
Is there, would you say that is there such a thing as a melting pot in with regards to indigenous people in this area too, or
Well,
is there an integration issue too?
I wouldn't really call it like a melting pot as much as there's just because I guess like when I think of melting pot, I think that we come in and melt and then like assimilate and become that and no longer become ourselves. But I think it's more of like in the city here in Chicago, and one of the reasons, kind of getting back to the question you asked about how I became interested in Indigenous narratives, is that a lot of times Indigenous people and Native people are erased from history or even our consciousness in the city. So sometimes it's much more than like the narratives of Native and Indigenous people get left out of the conversations, right? So there is, I think the work that I do is to uplift these narratives and to make sure that we have a presence of Indigenous people and the current issues that come with living in a city like Chicago that, for instance, doesn't have a reservation or anything like their tribal government. It's so many intertribal people that live here. So I think one of the numbers they said is about 65,000, give or take, that Native people, and that's Native American people here in the States. That's not including like, let's say people that are from the diaspora from like Latin America, right? Mm. So when you come from Latin America, then you become an immigrant and you become Latino, but then your identity gets kind of scraped from you, right? So that I find those really interesting, those topics and these things to explore and share with people, and kind of like talk through these types of things.
It is fascinating, and I would encourage people to go and check out your blog, definitely. And we're going to put the address here in the interview so people can go easily and check it out. One last topic that I wanted to touch on. Well, we're going to just for our audience, we're going to be celebrating, or we are celebrating this year 200 years of diplomatic relations between Mexico and the United States, and one of the roundtables that we are putting together along with the Center for Research on North America from UNAM, along with us, is a roundtable on linguistic diversity. And you're going to be moderating that one, just a heads up. And this is going to be taking place in August 17th. Is there anything that you can give us a hint on what this is going to be about, and just our audience, what we can expect?
Yeah, I'm really excited for this roundtable too. So yeah, thank you again to UNAM for the invite. So we decided to invite one of my close friends. He's from a town called Contepec in Morelos. And I'm really excited that he accepted to come and speak and be part of it and join in on the conversation, because I think it's also important to uplift and give opportunities and space to Indigenous people in Mexico that are part of the community as well and doing really fabulous work down there. So Victorino Torres Nava, he's going to be, he's an educator, a linguist too. He's from this community that I think it's pretty just amazing the type of work that he does, because the community of Contepec is one of the last remaining Nahuatl speaking communities in Morelos, right? So something around like 95% or more are Nahuatl speakers. So they use their language as their main language. And, you know, many of them are bilingual as well, but he's going to be talking about these efforts of Indigenous language preservation. And I'm really excited. So I think we're going to talk a little bit about that, the importance of Indigenous language preservation, especially like in Mexico and then maybe more broadly here in the States as well, and how challenging it could be, right? So to do this work. So I'm hoping that's one of the many topics we'll be talking about.
For sure. Well, there you have it. That's the invitation to join us for that one. And we're going to be promoting that one. And Is there anything you want to add before we close, Analú, just for our audience?
Yeah, come visit the Newberry. I work Tuesdays through Saturdays, so I'm always very open to giving people a little orientation, a tour. It's absolutely free to use the library facilities. The materials that we have here, all we require is that you register for a free reader's card, and then you're on your way to getting your hands on some fabulous historical materials here. So yeah, I invite individuals watching to come look me up here.
Analú, thank you so much. It's always wonderful to talk to you, to see you, and congratulations on all the work you do. We are really thrilled to keep working with you and your organization. And to everyone, again, I encourage you to visit Analú's blog. And to my audience, Analú, thank you so much for this interview. And to my audience, this has been another edition of Café Expresso. My name is Alberto Foncerrada, and I am your host. Café Expresso is a program of UNAM Chicago in alliance with Spanish Public Media. Until next time.